This week, Mehul Revankar, VP of Product Management and Engineering at Qualys, is here to discuss how to tame your vulnerability overload. Sven Morgenroth, security researcher at NetSparker, talks about the dangers of open redirects. In the security news, a Doom exploit wins an award, a puzzle honors Alan Turing, anyone can create a deepfake, jabberbugs, uncoded service paths, NIM malware, deadly sins of secure coding, and living in the toughest time of cybersecurity? Are we? All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing, known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker.
In a room full of damp, sweaty, naked programmers, he's the dampest, the sweatiest, need I say moistest of all. It's Paul Asadorian.
Welcome to a balmy episode of Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 688, recorded on March 25th, 2021, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left is the doctor. It's Dr. Doug White here in studio in the balmy, the Miami. Balmy. It should be like Miami, Florida studios.
The Security Weekly spa. we're dumping some more water on the sauna rocks.
Johnny's like, you want some ice? And I'm like, yeah, just throw some in front of the fans and we'll put some makeshift.
Yeah, exactly. The fog got all thick though.
Our air conditioning is not working, apparently.
So we have to drink martini.
That's right. So I'm like, well, we're gonna mask that with martinis. Yeah. On the lines remotely, Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us.
One time I'm glad I'm not in the studio, so thanks for that, Paul.
Yes, we do have some fabulous cigars. And I can't wait till you can come in the studio and join us. We haven't had a cigar together in too long. It's been too long, Jeff. This is ridiculous.
It's been over a year.
Over a year since I've seen Jeff.
Yep. Mr. Lee Neely is here with us. Lee, welcome.
Oh, good to be here. Looking forward to a fun evening. It's still weird to be looking out the window. It's still light outside at this hour.
Is there anyone else? I don't see anyone else on remotely. I thought we had Tyler. Okay. Jeff will be joining us in a little bit. Our next live webcast will be on April 29th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, where you can learn how to prepare for modern ransomware attacks. That's right. Myself, Jake Williams, and Adrian Sanabria will be talking about ransomware. SecurityWeekly.com/webcast. Make sure that you register today /on-demand. Gets you the entire archive of webcasts. Mehul Revankar has worked in vulnerability management for quite some time. In fact, we work together in vulnerability management. He is currently the VP of Product Management and Engineering at Qualys. Joins us tonight to talk how to tame the vulnerability overload. Mehul, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. Always a pleasure.
Yes, it's nice. This segment is also sponsored by Qualys, of course. You can visit securityweekly.com/Qualys to learn more about VMDR and all things Qualys, vulnerability management, detection, and response. Mehul, it's always wonderful to have you on the show, and you and I've done so many podcasts together in the past. It's nice we still get to do that and talk about vulnerability management, which is always a fun topic to talk about. Mehul, I wanted to start with, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the more recent events that have happened that are definitely impacted in some way, shape, form, or fashion, either by or with vulnerability management. Of course, Microsoft Exchange has had a number of recent exploits. SolarWinds, of course, was out there. That was a supply chain attack, but also underscores the need to make sure your systems are patched if someone's going to be inside of your network. So, thoughts, comments from you, just on speaking with customers about their challenges today with vulnerability management given current events.
I mean, when you look at some of the recent events that have happened, it highlights how important vulnerability management is in your general cybersecurity programs. When the SolarWinds compromise happened, I was looking at some of the stocks, and suddenly all the vulnerability management stocks were going up. I didn't realize what was going on, and then suddenly the market realized how important it is for organizations to have a good handle on where their assets are, which assets are vulnerable, how do you patch them, and so on and so forth. And that same process has again repeated with the exchange compromise that came out about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So we at Qualys, we obviously understood how critical vulnerability management is, but we have also started to now realize that in addition to being a really good vulnerability management company, it is very important for us to also serve the community in a way to help them patch these systems with our solutions. We obviously have the vulnerability management solution, which can also patch the vulnerabilities that are out there. So it has been a refreshing thing for us to see how easily it is possible for customers to not just scan for vulnerabilities, but also go ahead and deploy them and patch them with our free services that we have been rolling out.
But I think many of us would agree that we don't need to wait until there is a big exploit and security event to go patch something like your Exchange servers, that there's this thing called technical debt. And one of the things that I think is really a shining example of how useful the Qualys platform is allowing you to, like you said, scan, find vulnerabilities and remediate them. We should be doing that all along, because there could be bad things happening if you wait too long, and then you have to apply a whole bunch of patches to get to that latest patch, for example.
There's also compliance requirements.
Also compliance requirements. It's
that
great.
might impel you to patch early.
And Jeff brings up a great point. Is that hygiene? I mean, we sometimes phrase it as hygiene, but you got to keep up with things.
I mean, my 2 cents on this is it is easier said than done. Some of these assets, they can never go down. From when you look at the scanning and the remediation aspect of it, obviously the security professionals want to make sure that these patches are applied, the systems are up to date and so on. But we need to look at this from the lens of an IT personnel. They are wondering if this is going to bring down my servers, is this going to make the systems unstable? Are the patch rollouts going to mess up somehow and cause a downtime on the systems and so on. So all these things, collectively hamper the businesses from deploying the patches quickly, and the getaway is to delay the patch, right? So they keep delaying deployment of some of these critical patches until something like Exchange comes along, and then you have to patch quickly and you have to patch fast, and that can again introduce all sorts of other instabilities that you might not want to have. So ideally it is good to just patch quickly, this on a monthly cadence. But if you don't, then you'll run into situations where you have to basically rush and get things done.
Yeah, I also think that there's certain dangers of just waiting until the last minute to get things patched. I think by building that cadence, I guess it's not a great analogy, right? But like you're flexing your kind of patching muscle kind of as you go, right? Versus like never exercising and then go, you know what, today I'm going to just start doing some bench presses and it's a bad day. And I think it's the same way with patching, is you let that stuff build up and then you're like, wait, how do I apply those patches again? And then, okay, there's this recent patch from Microsoft for Exchange, for example, Like, how far behind am I? Do I need to install a bunch of stuff before? Now it's this huge exercise. How long is it going to be down? If I install patch 1 to get to patch 2, to get to patch 3, to get to the current one, do I have to reboot in between those? Like, there's a lot of debt you incur that when it comes time to pay the piper, when we have something like Exchange, it can cost you a lot more. Which you're kind of on the page.
And don't forget the testing aspect of it. Like, it's okay to go ahead and deploy the patches, but you cannot just go ahead and deploy it in your production environments. You have to deploy, you have to test these patches. You have to make sure, especially if these are, these are systems that can have impact on the business itself. So you want to make sure that you don't just go ahead and deploy the patches in production. You test them out. You make sure, once you apply the patches, all the applications that depend on it come up online and so on. So there is that aspect of the patching that also needs to be taken into account before you just go ahead and deploy the patches.
And people do write policies, and I've written a few myself, that end up making this a longer process. I mean, you have to kind of try to figure out, how do we get through this patching process? And if you write a lot of complex policies that require a lot of approvals, it may take a while to get through that patching process. So the longer you put it off, the worse it gets, and it just starts to pile up. But we've all been behind the patch curve. I know I'm behind on a couple of systems too. So.
Yeah.
Well, let me throw this out, because I am going to harp on this tonight, Paul.
Please do.
This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. There's a certain little PCI requirement, happens to be 6.2, that has this short little statement that says, install critical security patches within 1 month of release. So from the time it's announced and the patch becomes available, all the companies out there that have to do PCI are supposed to be installing the critical security patches within 30 days. Now, we worked at Tenable, Mehul's now at Qualys. We all know that ain't happening. And yet, I mean, there's certain critical securities that are discovered, like the Exchange issue from a couple weeks ago, where it is sort of an all hands on deck. Everybody drop what you're doing. We got to fix this problem. And I'm not convinced that PCI was ever intended to be interpreted beyond that. So, how are so many companies claiming to be PCI compliant? So they're claiming to be patching within 30 days for critical security patches, and yet we're talking on and on and on about how that's just not ever happening.
Because they lie, Jeff. They lie.
I want a little bit more from Mehul on than they just lie. We don't know they lie.
You have to keep in mind that the assets that touch PCI, they are, I mean, usually what we see, if one of our customers has 100,000 assets, not all of those 100,000 assets are within scope for PCI. The PCI scope is fairly limited. So those, they have audits in place. So those are tracked rigorously based on SLAs. So what I've seen is not all the assets get patched in 30 days, but there are certain assets that are the way you categorize them. For example, that if the assets are exposed to the internet, if they are in the DMZ, if they are supposed to be part of a PCI program, those are more rigorously tracked in terms of patching cycles, and they do adhere to the 30-day timeline. I've seen faster than that. If it is a critical, some of our customers, they have a 48-hour policy. But those are not for all the systems, but a category of systems that are more critical to the business.
Yeah, so you're pointing out, Mehul, that before 6.2 in PCI, there's 6.1, and 6.1 asks the organization to have an established program for identifying vulnerabilities and classifying them or coming up with a risk ranking that in theory should be applicable to your environment, so that you could make interpretations like, well, we're 6 logical hops into the network. There's no way an internet-born exploit that exploits this particular vulnerability is ever going to get to this particular asset, or the likelihood is that much more diminished, so we can reduce the risk ranking appropriately. But the irony in what you're describing is that, for the last couple of years that I've walked around all the security conferences, and I've caught all sorts of grief from everybody, including perhaps people on this show, that PCI is a bare minimum. PCI just scratches the surface, and yet this one little tiny requirement that says, patch your stuff for critical security patches within 30 days of release seems to be really onerous, and nobody can seem to do it. So, this is more of a rhetorical question, but how do you reconcile that PCI is calling for something like 30 days to patch, and that's just a bare minimum?
I think part of it is also the kind of tools that are available. We again, obviously my opinion is a bit biased towards Qualys, but we see the customers who use Qualys products for patch management, they usually patch faster. Part of it is related to the simplified workflow on our end, where it's a one-click patch where they can find the vulnerabilities, they can tag them based on the risk of the assets, prioritize them based on the severity of or the risk of the vulnerability, and then go ahead and patch them. If what I've seen is if organizations don't have a good patching program, then it is going to be a struggle for them to patch consistently within those timeframes. I was reading the Verizon DBIR report from last year. And one of the things that they highlighted was if a system did not have if the system did not have the patch for Eternal Blue, which is 3 or 4 years ago, there's a good chance it will not even have the patch which is 10 or 15 years ago. And the rationale is the patch management fails because of asset inventory, because a lot of times customers don't even know, or organizations don't even know where their assets are. So if you don't know what you have, you cannot protect what you don't know. But once you know where your assets are, once you know which vulnerabilities they have and the severity of them, and if you have a decent patch management solution in place, it's very easy from there to put in a patch management program in place, which is repeatable, auditable, and can work like clockwork as new vulnerabilities come out, either on Patch Tuesday or the Oracle critical patch updates or the other monthly patching schedules that exist out there.
Yeah, I think to me, but patching and remediation fall into, I think, some distinct buckets. I think there's the folks that whether you don't know you have the asset or you do know you have it, and you're just like, I'm not applying patches to that. Like, it's either too critical or I didn't know I had it, so patch is never going to get applied. Then there's the folks that are like, well, only if someone forces my hand and there's a song, a dance, and a logo, and every news outlet's carrying it, and my security people are yelling so loudly, okay, we'll drop everything we're doing. It's a fire drill. It's unplanned work. We're going to patch it. Then I think there's the bucket of, and I like the PCI requirement every 30 days. Well, don't just do that for critical patches. Say, look, every 28 days, we're going to apply patches, because conceivably most software you have is going to have some kind of update in 28 days. Maybe it doesn't, but we're going to put our systems, maybe classes of systems, on every 20 days. We're going to apply a patch. We're going to schedule the downtime. We're going to build this into a regular operations, so that when a critical patch comes along, it doesn't matter if it's critical or not. It doesn't matter. I know how to apply patches on a regular basis. To me, that's the bucket you wanna strive to be. But now there's in betweens. I think when we think about Oracle and SAP systems, I think they're on a patch schedule, but they're like, so in next year's revamp, that's our one time we apply patches, and then 365 days after that, that's the next time we're going to apply patches. I do think that's too long, but at least they're in some kind of cycle.
But it's easy to say to do that.
I can sit here up in my pulpit and have this podcast. Yeah, you should apply patches.
That's right. That's the
and
smug
all
consultant.
My stuff is patched as my nose gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
I never fail to patch.
Right?
But I do think there's a great difficulty, because, like Mehul said, you have to understand your asset structure, but you also have to understand how the assets interact with each other and what impact these things are going to have. And so people people start wanting to test, and they want to, say, well, I want to run this test and that test. And then, you start saying, well, okay, you got 28 days to do this, but then the email server crashes and you're on that for a week. And next thing you know, it's like, well, yeah, 28 days went by pretty fast and we still haven't gotten approvals.
Yeah, because we have to spin up the test environment again. We've got to test
you
the
should
patch,
do it. I'm not, believe me, I'm saying you should.
There
I
are
should
other
do
priorities. That I think is, Mehul, I think talked about that, right? That's what hinders people from getting to that actual patching is, especially outside of really large enterprises, even in large enterprises, right? They may have the resources, but their resources are tied up. So I think resource constraints, Mehul, is something you and I agreed on, is one of the biggest hindrances to applying these patches.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about patch management, patching is not the only activity IT teams do. I mean, they are responsible for maintaining the infrastructure, upgrading it, monitoring it. And so patching is just one additional piece of work that they need to do. And,
well, Mehul, I want to stop right there, right? Because you just made me think of something. I don't think there is a team or person that's like, your sole job is to patch. Because whoever's applying these patches, they have to understand, to Doug's point, the ecosystem. Yeah. What are the dependencies? Yeah. How does the system work? Right? There's not like one day, like, hey, your team, all they're doing is applying patch. You can't do that. There
used to be a person whose job was to move things from dev to prod, and there was like a gatekeeper person that we had.
APARs? What did they call them? APARs on the main APARs on the mainframe.
I don't remember what that was called. I don't.
That's a partition on a mainframe.
It's a partition.
So yes, there could be a dev APAR,
right?
Well,
right.
But I mean, our person was called Deb. So, but I mean, you could call her APAR. She doesn't care.
Paul was talking about the destination.
But I mean, that person,
that's the destination.
But her only job was that she sat between dev and prod. And when we pushed things, they went to her. It was a workflow, and it went to her. And her only job was to validate the touch where these updates touch things.
Right.
And so
that's more custom software as opposed to...
I know, but I mean, it's almost like you need that person back again
the systems world,
whose job is just to visualize that whole environment and be on top of it all the time.
The problem is that person knows how the systems work, so they're like, but there's like these 6 projects that we need you to work on too, right?
Well, you can't let that happen.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So, Paul, you almost touched on this, and I wanted to ask Mehul more directly. And it weaves together with what we're talking about. The question I wanted to ask more succinctly is, what do you see as the difference between patch management, which we're talking a lot about, but we're supposedly talking about vulnerability management as well? The sub question would be, and Paul, you brought this up. You've got, or maybe Mehul mentioned it first. You've got Microsoft's Patch Tuesday, which is, become ubiquitous in society, in the world these days. And if presumably companies are, geared up and ready to do whatever it is that they have to do based on Patch Tuesday, and that's sort of done and that's sort of in place and it sort of works, what then is left? And is what's left more patch management or more vulnerability management?
So we need to separate out 2 things. So there is patch management and there is remediation, right? So patch management is your routine day-to-day, or I guess monthly applying of the patches. But we also need to think about remediation itself. And when you talk about remediation could be applying a mitigation control. Maybe you don't have to patch. Maybe you just block something on the firewall, or you put in certain configurations in place. So, for example, Exchange compromise was a great example. Microsoft realized that not everybody can patch right away, so they listed out 4 the explicit mitigation control that if they were put in place, the risk of exploitation was greatly reduced because it would not allow the things that the exploiter, the folks that were trying to exploit the vulnerability, able to do. So, so patch management is, from an end state point of view, patch management is definitely good. But I think we should also be thinking about how can organizations take steps to secure their infrastructure without actually patching it, but actually applying certain controls in place, which will essentially eliminate the risk of the vulnerability. That aspect, in my opinion, doesn't get as much attention as it should, because that's a very effective way to bring down the risk from a major vulnerability. Because so if you have to, for example, if you are in a situation where you have to patch immediately, and you accidentally end up crashing or making your systems unstable, a far better approach at that point, until you have gone through your QA cycles and the test cycles, is to put those mitigation controls in place, so that the risk is eliminated, and you buy the time to do the proper testing that you need to do to make sure that whenever you deploy the patches, they don't bring your systems down.
But I'm wondering, the idea of mitigating instead of going through the patch cycles be really attractive from a management perspective. Do you think in general they really understand that the mitigation may just be a stopgap, that the ultimate, they really need to get down and do that patch? Or do they see it as a silver bullet and stop looking after the word mitigation?
I've seen both. So I've seen customers come back to us and say, well, we applied the mitigation control, so we're good here. So why are you reporting on this vulnerability? And then we have to go back and explain to them, well, that is good. It is good that you put the mitigation control in place. But if you go back and read the advisory from Microsoft or whoever it is, the recommendation is to patch. So for example, we get requests, well, by the way, I've applied the mitigation control. Qualys should not report this vulnerability because the mitigation control is in place. That is, so we go back and forth with our customers on that. But our recommendation is, if you cannot patch immediately, put the mitigation controls in place. Buy the time that you need to properly test and get these patches out.
So I was also wondering is, when we're talking about the Microsoft patch, and of course the Exchange Online servers weren't affected. I'm wondering, do you have any sense of how many customers didn't realize they were still hybrid, that they had thought they'd fully migrated and didn't have any on-site resources that still needed to be patched?
Our customers knew when they had where they had their Exchange servers, so we could see them patching almost immediately as soon as we got our detections out and the patches out. So I don't think Qualys customers had that challenge, partly because they had the kind of visibility they needed to know where their Exchange servers are.
So much for secret squirrel IT, huh? No, I've run into places where they really do have good visibility, but I've seen so many that they're not really sure. I know the goal of vulnerability management is to remove the uncertainty and hidden.
One of the reasons it was helpful was when the Exchange vulnerability came out. A lot of vendors, they can detect the vulnerability on the agent, so they can tell you whether you have a vulnerability or not. But one of the things we did very quickly, as soon as it came out, is to also release the remote detection for the vulnerability, so the customers were able to quickly scan their entire network and get a sense of where they're exposed in terms of their Exchange servers. So combining our agent detection with the remote detection was helpful for our customers to quickly analyze the exposure from Exchange, and then from there go to install the patch and remove that vulnerability from their infrastructure.
Interesting. So when I know what I've been wondering about is when I've been looking at the things related to vulnerability, both Microsoft and CISA put out detection tools that weren't really real-time detection. It was like, I can scan your system and see if it's been popped. And Microsoft had an auto cleanup action. Did you have stuff for customers that could just real-time defend them, or were you similarly having to have people run things manually, or were you doing do these tools as well as our tools kind of thing?
So we did three things, right? So one is we helped our customers to scan the assets for vulnerabilities, both through remote and agent. We quickly made available the patches to deploy to remediate these systems. But the other thing we also did is we also published our mitigation controls in one of our modules to look for, for example, if organizations are not able to patch, if they're not able to patch, the mitigation controls that they can apply to limit the exploitation of the vulnerability. So between assessment and prioritization and remediation and mitigation controls, we had that aspect covered. We didn't supply additional tools like Microsoft. The tool sets that we had, they supported all these capabilities natively, so they didn't have to, I guess, run scripts or do certain additional things in addition to what we were already offering as part of our solution.
Mehul, I like this approach. I have to say, I've always kind of poo-pooed second Tuesday of every month, Microsoft comes out with patches, and then we apply them, and we say we have good security hygiene. I'm like, oh, hold on. What about all the other days in the month where you weren't applying those patches and you were vulnerable? But what I picked up on what you said is like, look, you should have a good patch management program, and that's different from your mitigation and vulnerability management strategy, right? Having that process is great. That in between those other days in the month when you are exposed, you should have mitigations. You should also have detections. You should have other things in your program. So none of these excuse you from doing the other thing. And I think that's where a lot of enterprises and organizations, small or large, get into trouble, is they think, well, I apply second Tuesday of every month. I apply all the patches that come out. So you know what? I can check that box that says security and I'm good. But no, you need some kind of endpoint. You need to be able to put mitigating controls in, as you've mentioned, that buy you some time until you can apply the patch. You need to constantly look and build up your asset inventory so that the things you don't know about, you're applying those patches. And then you need to do all the other things as part of your security program. It's those things as a whole that if you kind of remove this patch management component or any one component, it can leave you vulnerable today in a big way.
And the only thing I would add to what you just said, Paul, is it is also important to prioritize the right set of vulnerabilities. Easier said than done. Yeah. But knowing patching an information disclosure vulnerability over something that is getting actively exploited is, it's common sense. But, unless you have that context that this is actually getting exploited in the wild, or is this part of an exploit kit or malware, is also important. That gives you the context when you bring up the prioritization schedule of all the things. These are the most important things we need to patch, and this is why we need to patch. And if you do this really well, the IT teams will also acknowledge and accept that as part of their workflow. So if you just dump hundreds of patches on their list, hey, go patch these things, the next question they're going to ask, why is this important? So you need to be able to tell the story. By the way, this is important because these are actively getting exploited in the wild, or this is part of a ransomware which is going through and exploiting systems, encrypting systems, and so on. So if you provide that level of context, so obviously you have to have a VM program, a patch management program, but you also need to have a really good prioritization mechanism in place or algorithm in place, so that you're patching smartly, or you're patching the right set of things instead of just busy patching.
Yeah, because exactly. Well, I mean, you should be in a regular cadence of patching, and sometimes that's going to be a critical patch, sometimes it's going to be other stuff. And then you kind of get breaks and go, maybe do some of the information. Like if you got a lull, it's project management at the end of the day, right? Like sometimes there's a merge, you got to drop everything. Sometimes you're like, look, these are the ones you're going to prioritize. But like if you've got a maintenance window, let's say, I agree. I don't like to tell your administrators, look, there were 327 patches released like in the past couple of days, and you got a maintenance window coming up, and you need to apply every single one of those. It's like, no, apply these 10, and then like go and iterate through the next one. And like maybe you don't get to some of those lower level vulnerabilities ever, but hopefully you've got some compensating controls.
I think the reality, though, Paul, and I want to commend Mehul for bringing up stuff. I just want to rephrase it sort of in a PCI context, because one of my big head scratchers that I've had for quite a while on the topic of vulnerability management is that within the PCI data security standard, there's actually a section. One of the 6 major goals of PCI is to establish and maintain a vulnerability management program. The sub-requirements underneath that are requirement 5, which is all about antivirus, anti-malware. and keeping those types of tools current. And we can go off on a tangent on that. I don't want to. But then there's also requirement 6, which we've already been talking about. 6.1 is have a risk ranking criteria, have a multiple methods for discovering or identifying vulnerabilities, and 6.2 patch on a monthly basis. But requirement 6 also has the whole section on secure code development, following change management procedures, so on and so forth. What's always been a head scratcher to me since my days at Tenable, where all three of us were at one point, is that vulnerability scanning is all the way down in requirement 11. So between 5 and 6, there's 7, 8, 9, 10, and then all the way down there is 11. And I think Mehul was
11.3 is the pen test requirement.
Very good. And what's the scanning requirement, Paul?
Is that 11.2?
Very good.
Yeah.
And bonus points if you can distinguish the internal scanning requirement from the external scanning requirement.
Now you're really stretching my knowledge. I'm a, like 1-2 trick pony when it comes to PCI. You know this.
All right, but still, you've come such a long way. You've got
I'm getting there. I'll work harder on it. I promise.
400 to go. But what Mehul was describing, I think, is sort of encapsulating what part of the problem is. And I think as an industry, and certainly the scan vendors, and I've been talking to, and full disclosure, I've been talking to Mehul over the last couple of weeks because I've been doing this little research project on vulnerability management. So I've been talking to Qualys, I've been talking to the other one, and the other one. This is Qualys' time, but you know who the big three are, and the response that I've gotten, and to Qualys' credit, Qualys actually had the most succinct and precise answer to the questions that I was asking. And I was trained since I worked for a competitor to always, bash Qualys. But, Qualys actually had probably had and has probably the most decent grasp of this thing that I've been scratching my head over with, where does vulnerability scanning fit into a vulnerability management program? But I think whether the industry has supported it or whether the scan vendors reinforce it, and I would say that some of them are more notorious at reinforcing this than others, but the perception for a lot of people is that vulnerability management starts with a vulnerability scan. So what you were saying earlier, Paul, about there's 360 some patches available. Why haven't you done anything? The reality is more, PCI context. Somebody's got to run the vulnerability scan, so they run the internal vulnerability scan and discover 360 or more like 3,600 vulnerabilities, and they got to do something about it. And why have they never looked at these things before? Why have they not addressed any of these things before? Because they haven't scanned before. So so the fact that they run a scan and discover all these things is part of the problem. So nobody likes to do that. But I think it goes, to try to answer the question, and I do want to hear Mehul's take on this, but I think the reason why vulnerability scanning has become the crutch that starts so many vulnerability management programs is because most companies, or so many companies, aren't doing all those procedural process sort of regular activities to build and maintain and update secure systems and networks and assets, or even keep track of what assets they have. They just sort of bop along, business as usual. They're trying to keep the lights on, keep the lights green, keep the money flowing, keep the revenue coming. And something like PCI comes along and says, well, wait a minute, you got to do security, so you have to do one of the things you have to do a scan. And so they run a scan, and for the first time they're seeing all these problems. But the problems are not reflective of just unpatched systems. The problems are reflective of they're not using secure build standards, they're not doing hardening, they're not tying the business practices together and figuring out, well, we've got to do this, we can't patch it, this, we rely on this, so what do we do from a security perspective to offset the fact that there's this glaring vulnerability? It's a complex problem, but I like how Mehul sort of expressed it in a way, and I'm just trying to connect the dots, maybe mostly in my own head. But Mehul, I'm sorry, take it away. What are your thoughts?
So my view on this is the term vulnerability management has been bashed around incorrectly, in my opinion. My sense is if you just do vulnerability assessment or vulnerability scanning, that is not vulnerability management. If you're just doing vulnerability prioritization, that is not vulnerability management. If you're just doing patch management, that doesn't mean you're doing vulnerability management. I see that all these are subsets of vulnerability management. Vulnerability management requires to do vulnerability management really well, you have to be able to discover or scan all the vulnerabilities. You should be able to prioritize the right set of vulnerabilities. You should be able to patch these vulnerabilities. You should be able to also close the loop on the vulnerabilities from assessment to prioritization to remediation. Until the vulnerability exists, if you're not, you have to be able to manage the vulnerability through its entire life cycle, from assessment, from discovery to assessment to prioritization to remediation. That, in my opinion, is vulnerability management. It has been, some people take it as, oh, well, we have a scanner, and we scan every month, and that is not, in my opinion, it's not vulnerability management. Vulnerability management is all-encompassing program, which is actually helping you manage the vulnerabilities right from the time it was first discovered to the point it was eliminated from your organization. If you're not doing that, then you're not doing vulnerability management.
And also, I think, we'd be remiss not to talk about browser-based vulnerabilities. I mean, this year alone, we've covered 3, maybe 4 at one time they were 0-day vulnerabilities in Chrome. We knew threat actors were using them. There were patches that were released. And to me, I think when you look at operating system ones, maybe from Microsoft, almost as important, and in some cases even more important, that you're applying these third-party patches for Chrome, for Firefox, for Edge. I like Microsoft's Edge. I don't know about anyone else. I run it on Linux, which is like talk about a rare case. In Edge case, I guess it would be an Edge case.
It's like how the world ends. Running Edge on Linux.
It's important to patch the browser. I mean, a lot of them are stemming from the V8 engine in Chrome. I think a lot of those it's processing that user input. It's processing the page. It's really exposed and vulnerable. It's trying to take on a lot.
But Paul, who runs a browser on a production server? I mean, come on.
Well, I mean, but I think what we focused on, Jeff, to that point is, server-based vulnerabilities. We've talked about Exchange. There's certainly RDP. Mehul, you were mentioning in prep for this. But I think on client systems, the browser is almost as important, if not more important. Mehul, can you speak to maybe how
I'm going to inject a question for Mehul right there too, because how do you prioritize? I mean, this is a question that's been asked since the dawn of time. So, I mean, what do you have? What's the secret to it? I mean, do I
got servers? You got clients with browsers?
Do I patch my browsers before my servers? Do I patch only on Tuesdays once a month? Or how do you recommend that I do that?
Yeah. I mean, you have to come up with your own prioritization algorithm. For example, if you have assets exposed to the internet, obviously those are, you have to bring in the right context when you're trying to prioritize the vulnerabilities. The context could be asset context, whether, this is high value assets is exposed to the internet, those kind of things. You can bring in vulnerability context when you are talking about prioritization. Is this vulnerability exploited in the wild? Is this part of ransomware that is going around? Is this a wormable vulnerability which is going to spread across your network? That kind of context is definitely.
But Mehul, in your formula, right? If there's a user that's has access to sensitive information, they've got a browser that's accessing the internet. I mean, they are exposed to the internet in that sense, right? That has to carry some priority.
Right, and so that's where you bring in the asset context. Is this asset holding sensitive information? And once you have that level of context in place, either through your vulnerabilities or your asset, then you can do the right prioritization. If you don't know your assets, then any vulnerability prioritization you do may not be as useful as you may want it to be, because you want to prioritize the vulnerabilities on the right. on the right type of asset. So, for example, you could have multiple vulnerabilities on an asset, but the service itself may not be running, right? So, prioritizing for remediation of vulnerabilities that are not even for applications that are not even getting used is suboptimal. If you have a really good patch management solution, you should probably remove them completely from your system. So, for example, one pattern we consistently see is as new browsers have been introduced, the usage of Firefox has gone down. Right? But the Firefox vulnerabilities still exist. It's not like
because it's still there. People don't uninstall it. Like I might use it, right? I think a lot of us tech people have that like that. It's like that box of cables you have in your office. You're like, if I throw it out, I'm gonna need it. And I think it's the same thing with browser. If I uninstall Firefox, I'm gonna need it for something, right?
And what I'm saying is, as an IT professional, you could make a decision that to eliminate Firefox from your entire estate, and those kind of vulnerabilities will then go away, and you don't even have to worry about prioritizing those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, agreed.
But that kind of streamlining has to be part of this process.
I agree.
Because otherwise, you're just playing a dangerous game. Where, and I've seen customers like this where they just have a Wild West. Their employees can install anything they want, anytime they want, anywhere they want, and they don't have any controls around it. They don't know how to control it, and then you end up back where you're talking about, where there's stuff in the background that nobody's used in 7 years is still sitting there. So I think
I've got Chromium, Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and Opera.
You're the problem. It's like, but that's.
Can we talk about Java as well? That's like.
I was going to pivot to the demo. I was going to pivot to the demo, but I think we've got some stuff coming up on Java. Mehul's got some in Qualys. Have some awesome stuff coming up. I don't want to spoil it, but we're going to talk about Java likely in upcoming segments because it's one of those things that you install as a user. You install an application, it includes Java, and so there's some use cases there, Mehul, I think in future segments we might explore. But I do want to explore the demo because I think making it easy for people to run vulnerability scans, identify vulnerabilities, and apply the patch has always been the ultimate goal for me. Having worked in vulnerability management for so long, I'm like we're right here. Like I can tell you what all the vulnerabilities are, and I'm like, that just gotta go.
It's the only way it's ever going to get done.
So Mehul, please, and I'd love to. I haven't seen the product in some time, so
let me do a fast version of this. This is usually a 30-minute demo, so I'll figure out how to do this in the next 8 minutes. So this is what you're seeing is our Qualys VMDR. I mentioned
someone in the background's really excited about the demo too, which I think is awesome.
So, one fundamental belief we have is you cannot do vulnerability management really well until you know your assets. So you cannot protect what you don't know. So this is where the global IT asset inventory module, which is a free module with Qualys VMDR that is available. What this allows you to do is bring in all the assets that you have into a single pane of glass. You can use a wide variety of our sensors, our agents, virtual scanners, physical scanners, our cloud connectors, ServiceNow connectors to bring in all the assets into a single pane of glass. And then you can start to visualize. So Mehul,
data. On asset management, you've got multiple modules that are aware of, make you aware of other assets, right? Like that is correct. You got an agent running on a system. You can see what applications it's used, what connections it's making to other systems, and infer assets from that.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me. And once these assets, depending on which source of data you're using to bring in the assets, either the agent or the scanner, they will start to show up on our dashboard, and then you can visualize this, categorize this, make decisions on what kind of assets you have. We also spend a lot of time in making sure that we talk about end of life software, because that's the right area for attackers to own the system. So we give visibility into that as well. But going back to the example, when something like the Exchange vulnerability happens, you want to know where are my vulnerable assets. So what we have been able to do with our Elasticsearch backend is make this entire process queryable. You can ask questions to our platform. Where are my Exchange servers? And so I already have one of a search query configured. You can quickly answer a question. Show me all the servers with systems running Windows, and the software is Microsoft Exchange. And within a matter of seconds, you will get real-time insights into all your Exchange assets. You could do the same thing with something like SolarWinds. So when SolarWinds happened, our customers wanted to know, hey, where are my where is SolarWinds deployed in my infrastructure. So this would give complete understanding of all the SolarWinds software, not just the SolarWinds Orient that was vulnerable. So this gives you the global ID asset, and this is from across the sources. We normalize it, categorize it for you to view this data. And then what you can do from here is you can tag this particular information to do higher level functions with those assets. Those could be patch management, those could be vulnerability management, and so on. So let me take this example of Exchange so that we can use it in the later part of the demo. We can quickly use this query, create a new tag for it. In this case, we'll create an Exchange. I'm not going to create this because I already created it, but you can create a dynamic rule for it from here and type it in. And as soon as any asset that comes on board into the platform matches this criteria, it is automatically going to tag them for automatically tag them as Exchange. So let me go into my inventory. And once you have this, you obviously have a lot of rich information about the asset itself. So the system information, the installed software, the vulnerabilities, policy compliance, all of this is driven by our lightweight agent, which serves multiple use cases. So I think we are at around 7 use cases with EDR, policy compliance, vulnerability management, for file integrity monitoring, and so on. So multiple use cases could be consolidated with a Qualys solution. So once you have the right tags, once you have the understanding of the assets, we can switch over into the VMDR solution. And here you'll get a comprehensive view of all the vulnerabilities in your organization. Sometimes when a major vulnerability breaks out, such as the proxy logon vulnerability, the Exchange vulnerability, you can, again, same concept here. You can come in here and start to query your infrastructure for, show me all assets with the proxy logon vulnerability. And within seconds, this, across the entire estate. And this is our agent-based approach as well as the unauthenticated approach. You can.
It helps answer that question when your manager comes to you and like, so, like I heard about this new vulnerability, like how are we doing? And you can say either like we're screwed or like like we're all right. It's like usually the answer is like from that screen it looks like we're screwed.
Yeah. Like, do these windows open?
And you can also save this to a query, a widget, so that it automatically shows up on the dashboard.
Nice.
Which is where all the the management folks would the question that you ask: how are we doing? Are we doing better? Are we doing worse? So, for example, this will give you a higher level view of the vulnerabilities. But the key aspect is once you take care of a single vulnerability like proxy logon or something like Blue Keep or Eternal Blue, you want to find out if there are similar types of vulnerabilities in your infrastructure. So this is where Qualys VMDR, the prioritization aspect comes out really well. You could start to look for so let's say one thing we have seen is the attacks against remote desktops have been increasing. And so I showed you how we can quickly create a tag. You can define a criteria and automatically those assets get tagged with in this case remote desktop. I also have a tag for Exchange servers. I can quickly find those assets from here and then get into the prioritization aspect of it. So I can apply additional levels of prioritization algorithms. This is something we talked about as part of the interview. How do you prioritize? So you can make a decision on how to prioritize. We tend to stay away from the scoring aspect of it because we want to contextualize the vulnerability for our customers. So is the vulnerability getting actively exploited? Is the vulnerability part of malware, or is it part of ransomware, and so on? And you can make these decisions. There are obviously some pre-filled tags that are already set, and you can prioritize this from here. So let's take some of these criteria out. And now you can see the number of vulnerabilities have gone down from 126,000 to about 1,000, about 1.35K. so that is one part of it. But what we do is we go in further, giving the asset context as well for prioritizing the vulnerabilities. So in this case, if you're looking for Exchange servers, you want to know which are my internet exposed facing Exchange servers. So by just toggling this, it is the numbers are drastically reduced. So of all the things, these are the most critical vulnerabilities I need to patch. You can also make the decision on whether finding all the vulnerabilities that are running, that are vulnerable, and the system and the service is actually running. So you're making the right prioritization decisions. You can save this to a dashboard, and you can track this prioritization screen on a day-to-day basis and track it over time and make sure that you're trending down over a period of time. And the last thing I will mention is once you have this data, is you can start to deploy the patches. So you can come in here. It is completely integrated into the solution. You can select. It will automatically bring in the assets that you've already selected. In this case, the RDP and the Exchange servers. You can select the patches, again, automatically selected as part of the workflow. You can schedule it and be done with it. You can either do it on demand, or you can set it at a duration during your patch window and be done with it, and completely automate the whole process. I don't want to patch this because at some point I do want to do this demo again to others. But you can see the.
That's all right. Yeah, we saw you get there, and I love the criteria, right? Because you're whittling down based on things that matter in the real world, not just a CVSS score or arbitrary patch criticality defined by someone else. It's what do I have that's vulnerable? What's internet facing? What's on critical systems? What has malware associated with it? And then you can tell your team, just go patch those things first, because in all actuality, those really are the most critical things, right? Those things are going to make you have a bad day really fast. Not to say other things don't matter, but they don't matter as much. And getting to that point is super hard.
That is correct. And so this is
unless you have Qualys, because that was actually pretty awesome. I like those all those tags and the
one last thing I will mention is if you also monitor vulnerabilities on a daily basis. I mean, we have a massive research team who is actively looking for any vulnerabilities that are breaking out. So in addition to this prioritization, what we also do is we automatically, when major vulnerabilities are breaking out, we create our own write-up about these vulnerabilities, our own commentary around these vulnerabilities, why these vulnerabilities are important, so that users can know when they come in that these new vulnerabilities came out. These are the ones that we need to pay attention to. So, Paul, you mentioned the Google 0 days, right? So there was a recent 0 day in Google Chrome, and we immediately went in, we did our analysis, and we automatically mapped those vulnerabilities to the assets, so that now from here you can directly go create the tags, create the patch deployment, because the patching solution also does third-party patching. So if you have your browsers out there, you can patch those browsers as well as the operating systems. That's
awesome.
Hey, Mehul,
that was a great demo, Mehul. You really condensed that down and made it impactful. That was wow. Yeah, that's impressive.
Damn.
That's what he trained for. That's what he rehearsed.
Yeah.
Even though it blew up on him and he was winging it. There's a question on the Discord server, if I can try to relay it to you, Mehul. Someone is asking if Qualys is able to deploy, I'm just reading it verbatim, deploy arbitrary patches like upload some script or registry key changes or arbitrary MSI/MSU and then deploy that, or is it only stuff that you guys have already mapped and published?
That's a great question. So that capability is coming soon. We're actively building it out, and we should be having
It's on the roadmap.
It's on the roadmap. And no, it's not only on the roadmap, it's actively getting worked on.
Sorry, that was a little that other company humor.
That's most companies.
Yeah,
that's product management is what that is. Just put it at that.
I'm serious, guys. It is actually getting worked on. So
Qualys is working on some great stuff, and they've got some more segments coming up, and it's awesome stuff.
Yeah. Very nice product.
Cool.
Mehul, I thought Jeff had more questions from Discord, or
I do, but I don't want to. I mean, I always have questions, but
All right, one final question.
So this is somewhat of a philosophical question.
Okay, not one question, okay, but not philosophical.
No. In 37 parts.
I'm curious because they've all done it. All the big scan engine companies have done it. But from a Qualys perspective, do you have any idea, Mehul, of what precipitated the transition from calling Qualys a vulnerability scanning company or vulnerability scan engine company to vulnerability management? Was there something in terms of capability and something in terms of the product suite that precipitated that change? I'm just curious because you have all of them. Everybody is now a vulnerability management company, and they used to be scanners.
That's a great question. So, when we started out, we wanted to solve the problem of vulnerability management end to end. So we have seen the pitfalls of vulnerability scanning for over the last 20 years. For the maybe the first 10 or 15 years, it was largely stable. The assets were really well known. You had a stable set of traditional assets, your servers, workstations, corporate environment, and so on. So vulnerability management, for the most part of, I guess, the early 2000s, and even to the point it was 2012, 2013, not as complex. But we saw a rapid transition into different types of non-traditional assets with IoT, OT, mobile, containers, the transition to the cloud and so on. So that required a different kind of vulnerability management solution, which not only could talk to the traditional assets, but also the non-traditional assets. And the second thing that we saw was many VM solutions, the customer, at least the feedback from the customers was they were getting overwhelmed with vulnerabilities, and for the large part of our history, we were scanning and telling our customers, you have these 100,000 vulnerabilities, right? So the response action was actually the most important part to remediate the vulnerabilities, not just find them, but also remediate them. So we took a very holistic approach. So we said, if you want to really solve the vulnerability management problem, we have to do a good job at asset inventory. We have to get to a point where customers are not scanning once a month or once in a quarter, but they almost have instantaneous reporting on vulnerabilities that are there, which is what we do with our agents. We wanted to make sure that they are focusing their efforts on the right types of vulnerabilities. So that's where the threat prioritization comes in. And then finally close the loop with patch management so that they can remediate the vulnerabilities with a single solution without having to buy 4 different solutions, which are 4 different silos in 2 different siloed teams, which means that the vulnerability management was not getting well done. So we have taken a complete 360 view on this. This is why we call it VMDR. It is vulnerability management, detection, and response, and all those components are baked into the solution. And that's why we made that journey last year, is to completely redefine our VM solution.
Mehul, it's great stuff. Awesome demo, awesome discussion. I want to thank you very much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly this evening.
Thank you. It was great talking to all of you.
For folks who want to learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Qualys to learn more about VMDR. Coming up next, Sven Morgenroth from NetSparker will talk about open redirects. Stay tuned.